All right, so you're thinking about maybe hiring a Maypole developer.
Interesting niche, yeah.
But you don't even know where to begin. Like, what IS Maypole?
Right.
What makes these developers so unique? We're going to get you those answers today, and we're going straight to the experts at theperfectdeveloper.com.
Absolutely.
They've helped so many companies find the right developers, and we're tapping into their insights today to give you the inside scoop on Maypole development.
Yeah, it's a fascinating little corner of the development world.
Now, speaking of finding that perfect developer, if you want to simplify that whole process, all you need is theperfectdeveloper.com's 5 questions.
That's true.
Try it out at their website.
Okay.
But now let's get into it.
Okay, sounds good.
Can you give us like the Maypole elevator pitch?
Mm-hmm.
What is it in plain English, and why is it all of a sudden kind of coming back into style?
Yeah, so Maypole is a web application framework, uses the Perl programming language. It's been around for a while, actually, but it's having a bit of a resurgence. Lately, companies are realizing they need to modernize those older Perl systems, and Maypole is a good way to do that without starting completely from scratch.
Interesting. So it's not just for like building brand new apps from the ground up.
Nope, not at all. It's great for revitalizing those legacy systems. It's like breathing new life into them. And companies are often really surprised to learn that they can just use their existing Perl code and build on top of it. Add in some of Maypole's modern features.
That's got to be a huge cost saving compared to just doing a full rewrite.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So what makes a Maypole developer different from your typical web developer?
Well, for starters, they need a deep understanding of Perl,
Yeah.
which, isn't as common as some other languages these days.
Right.
They also need to be masters of the model view controller architecture,
Okay.
or MVC, which is essential for building those really heavy data applications that can, grow with your business.
So they're not just code wizards, they're like architects of complex systems.
That's a great way to put it. Exactly. And we can't forget about their database skills.
Of course not.
Maypole is all about handling data efficiently, so these developers need to be fluent in SQL, database design, optimization techniques, the whole 9 yards.
Sounds like finding a Maypole developer is like finding a unicorn.
Yeah, kind of, a little bit.
Are companies really willing to shell out the extra money for that kind of niche expertise?
They are, especially when they start to consider the other options. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
If you have a really important system that's built on Perl, it's vital to your business, finding a developer who can modernize it with Maypole, that's way more cost effective than just rewriting everything in a totally new language.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's say I'm convinced and I'm ready to start hiring. What skills should I be looking for beyond, the Perl, the database stuff? What sets a truly great Maypole developer apart?
Well, definitely look for someone who is a great problem solver. That's number one.
Got it.
Because Maypole isn't, as widely used as some of those other frameworks. So there's not always an easy answer when you encounter a bug or a challenge.
Yeah.
So you need somebody who can think critically and troubleshoot really effectively.
Right. So that's true of any developer, but even more so in a niche field like Maypole.
Exactly. And you'll want someone who's active in the Maypole community.
Okay.
It's a close group. And those who are contributing, those are the ones pushing the framework forward.
So that's a good sign then. It shows their passion, their commitment to staying up to date.
Absolutely, yeah. And that kind of enthusiasm, that's priceless. Now, as far as projects go, I think Maypole really shines when you're thinking about those data-driven applications.
Right.
Things like internal tools for businesses, CRM systems, inventory management systems,
Right.
Anything where the focus is on managing and manipulating data effectively.
Okay, so not the flashy consumer apps that we see all the time,
Yeah,
but more the behind-the-scenes kind of workhorses that keep businesses running smoothly.
you got it. That's a great way to put it. Maypole's all about building those robust, reliable systems that handle data precisely.
Now let's get down to brass tacks here.
Yeah.
What are the salary expectations for Maypole developers, and how much does location play into that?
Location is always a factor, just like any other tech job. So in the US, you're probably looking at a range of, I'd say, $70,000 to $110,000 a year.
Okay.
For a full-time Maypole developer. And of course, those figures can go way higher in major tech hubs like Silicon Valley, New York City.
Sure, yeah.
Makes sense.
Those salary ranges seem pretty competitive, actually, for a niche technology like that.
Yeah.
Are there any hidden costs associated with hiring a Maypole developer that people should be aware of?
There can be. You might have to factor in the cost of specialized hosting for your Maypole applications.
Okay.
Because Perl isn't supported by every single hosting provider out there, so you might need to find one that specializes in that language.
Ah, that's a good point. It's easy to kind of overlook those infrastructure costs when you're just focused on finding the right person for the job.
Exactly. And, while we're talking about finding talent, I really can't recommend the perfectdeveloper.com enough.
Yeah.
They really do take the guesswork out of hiring developers, especially for, specialized roles like Maypole.
I heard good things about them.
Yeah.
Their 5 questions tool sounds really intriguing.
It's really useful because it helps you to define your project's needs and identify those key skills that you should be looking for in a developer.
So let's switch gears a little bit here and talk about hiring models.
Okay.
Should I go full-time, part-time, freelance? What are the things I should be thinking about?
That's a great question. It really depends on the project itself and your long-term goals. So if you've got a long-term project and Maypole is going to be a core part of your technology, your stack, then hiring a full-time developer is a good option. Gives you that deep integration with your team.
Yeah, you get that consistency. They become a part of the company culture.
Exactly. Yeah.
But what if I don't have enough work to keep a full-time Maypole developer busy all the time?
Right. Then what?
What are my other options?
Yeah. Then a part-time developer might be a better fit. Someone you can call on for a certain number of hours each week or each month.
Right. That makes sense. Especially from a budget perspective.
Right. Yeah.
What about freelancers? When does it make sense to go that route?
Freelancers are great if you have a really short-term project or if you just need them for one very specific task. They're flexible and you can often find some real specialists out there, people with really niche skills like Maypole.
So you're kind of like assembling this dream team of experts, but, on demand.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
But how do you make sure that everything stays consistent, that the quality's good when you're working with people who could be all over the world?
Yeah, that's a good point. Communication is key. You need to be really, really clear about what you expect, set deadlines, and make sure you have a solid system for communication. That's really important.
So you're setting them up for success, just like you would with any other team member.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, let's talk about location. Should I try to hire locally or should I look at overseas talent? What are the pros and cons of each?
That's a tough one. It's all about finding the right balance. Hiring locally usually means it'll be easier to communicate, you'll have a better cultural fit, which can be really important for complex projects.
Makes sense.
But it can also be more expensive.
Right, so it's that classic trade-off, cost versus convenience. What if I have a limited budget and I need to look at some more affordable options? Are there any risks involved with hiring overseas Maypole developers?
Yeah, there are a few things to be careful of. Time zones and language barriers can make things difficult sometimes, and it can be harder to really gauge cultural fit when you're not working face-to-face.
Sure.
And you really have to make sure you do your due diligence when you're checking their experience with Maypole, because the talent pool might be a lot smaller in some regions.
Right, you don't want to sacrifice quality just to save a few bucks.
Nope, absolutely not.
So let's talk about the Maypole development process itself. What can a good Maypole developer actually do on their own? Why would I need to bring in extra help or even put together a whole development team?
A really skilled Maypole developer can do a lot independently. They can set up that application framework, configure the database, build those core features, integrate with other systems, even put in some basic security measures.
So they're like a one-person army.
Yeah, kind of, but even a superhero has their limits.
Right.
So if you're building a huge application with all these fancy features, complicated workflows, tons of data to manage, you're probably going to need a whole team.
Okay, that makes sense.
Like a single developer can build a really solid foundation.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to build a skyscraper,
You need more people.
you need a lot more people.
So how do I know when it's time to bring in the reinforcements? What are some of the signs that I need a team, not just one person?
One big sign is if you need a lot of different skills for your project, more than one person can handle, you might need someone who's great at front-end development to make it look really nice for the users.
Right.
Someone else to handle all the database stuff on the back end.
Okay.
And maybe even a dedicated QA engineer to make sure there are no bugs, that everything's running smoothly.
So it's not just about the code, it's about everything else that goes into making a good application.
Exactly, exactly. And if you need to connect your project with other systems, integrate them, that's another sign you might need a team, because managing all those integrations, that can be tricky, and it really takes a coordinated effort.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You don't want one person juggling all those balls, dropping them.
Right, yeah.
So how do I manage Maypole developers, whether I have one or a whole team? What are some good tips for making sure they're productive, engaged, and doing their best work?
Well, you got to remember that Maypole often involves working with complicated data, intricate logic, so clear communication. That's absolutely essential.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Break down those big projects into smaller pieces, make it clear what you're expecting, and give them all the tools and support they need to be successful.
It's all about setting them up for success, right?
Yeah.
Just like with any other team.
Absolutely, yeah. And because Maypole is, it's not as common as some other frameworks, it's really important to encourage them to keep learning, to keep developing their skills.
Yeah.
Maybe help them go to conferences, workshops, online courses, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Keeps their skills sharp, and it shows you're invested in them.
And that investment's going to benefit you in the long run as well.
Exactly. Now, we've mentioned theperfectdeveloper.com a couple of times already.
Yeah, they seem like a great resource.
They are, and I want to talk a little bit more about what makes them so valuable for companies looking to hire Maypole developers? What sets them apart from the other recruiting platforms out there?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too.
Well, I think they really get it, They understand specialized technologies like Maypole, and they don't just look for keywords on a resume.
Go.
Their team really takes the time to understand your project, your company culture, even your long-term goals for your technology.
So it's a lot more personalized, more in-depth than just browsing through a database of developers.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
They have this network of developers that they've vetted, people with expertise in all sorts of different areas, and they're really good at matching them up with the right opportunities.
Which is so valuable, especially in a field like Maypole, where it can feel impossible to find the right expertise.
Right, yeah.
Now, you mentioned their 5 questions tool earlier.
Right.
Can you remind everyone what that's all about and why it works so well?
It's a really clever way to start your search for a developer. It gets you thinking about the really essential requirements for your project, and it helps you figure out what skills and experience you should be looking for in a Maypole developer.
It's like a roadmap then for finding the perfect candidate.
Yeah, exactly. And it's free.
Oh, nice.
It's on their website.
I think our listeners will find that really helpful.
I hope so.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to remind everybody that working with these specialized developers, especially in a niche field like Maypole, it can have its own set of challenges.
Yeah, definitely.
Some potential pitfalls along the way. So we're going to explore those in the final part of our episode.
We'll get into all that.
So stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the final part of our Maypole deep dive.
Here we are.
We've talked about what Maypole IS, why it's becoming more popular these days, how to actually find those Maypole experts.
Right.
Now let's talk about some of the challenges that you might face along the way.
Yeah.
Because it's not always going to be smooth sailing, even with the best developers.
It's true.
What are some common pitfalls, and how can we avoid them?
I think one thing that trips people up sometimes is they underestimate how long it takes to learn Maypole.
Yeah.
It's not, as common as some other frameworks. So even if you've got a really experienced developer, they might need some time to get up to speed.
Yeah, it's like learning a whole new language.
Yeah, exactly.
A new dialect.
A new dialect.
You need time to master it.
You got to get the accent down.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So patience is key, especially in the beginning.
Absolutely. And good documentation, training, open communication, all that stuff can help those developers get up to speed quickly.
Now, speaking of communication, are there any specific challenges that come up when you're working with Maypole developers, especially given that it is such a niche framework?
One thing I've noticed is that it can be tough to find developers who can explain those complicated technical concepts in a way that, non-technical people can understand.
Right, because not everyone speaks fluent code.
Exactly, yeah. So
Yeah.
you got to bridge that gap between the tech world and, the business side of things. That's so important.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Any tips for making that communication smoother?
I think it's a good idea to encourage your developers to, improve their communication skills. Maybe some workshops, mentoring, things like that.
Yeah.
And when you're interviewing people, pay attention to how they explain technical things. Can they make it easy to understand without, oversimplifying it?
That's a good point, because it's not just about technical skills. It's about being able to talk to a variety of people.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's manage those expectations here. What are some common misconceptions about Maypole that can lead to, unrealistic expectations or delays in projects?
One thing I hear a lot is that Maypole is only good for small, simple applications, and that's just not true. While it's great for prototyping and developing quickly, it can also handle those big, complex systems.
So don't be fooled by its simplicity.
Yeah,
It's got a lot more power than people realize.
that's right. Another misconception is that because Maypole is built on Perl, it's, old-fashioned or clunky.
Right.
But Perl is actually a really powerful, flexible language, and Maypole uses it really well to create efficient and scalable applications.
So it's about picking the right tool for the job. And Maypole definitely has its strengths.
Absolutely.
Now, let's talk about budgets. We've talked about salaries, but are there any other hidden costs that people forget about when they're budgeting for a Maypole project?
Yeah, one thing that often gets overlooked is specialized hosting. Like we talked about before, not every hosting provider supports Perl applications, so you might need to spend a little extra to get a hosting environment that specifically works with Perl and all its components.
You can't just assume that any hosting platform will work.
No, not always.
What about ongoing maintenance and support? Is there anything special to keep in mind when it comes to keeping a Maypole application running smoothly?
Yeah, because Maypole is more specialized, it might take a little more work to find developers for those ongoing tasks.
Make sense?
You might need to tap into those niche communities or partner with a company that specializes in Maypole.
You need someone who really knows the ins and outs of the framework to keep things running smoothly.
Exactly.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to talk about theperfectdeveloper.com one more time.
Okay.
They've come up a lot in our conversation, and for good reason.
Yeah.
Can you just sum up why they're so helpful, especially for companies looking for Maypole developers?
I think what they do really well is match specialized talent with the right opportunities. They understand all those little details about niche technologies like Maypole, and they've got a really good track record of connecting companies with developers who have the exact skills and experience they need.
So they take all the stress out of hiring, which is a huge relief.
Oh, yeah.
Now, for our listeners who are ready to start their Maypole journey, where can they find theperfectdeveloper.com's 5 questions?
It's on their website. Just go to theperfectdeveloper.com. You can't miss it. It's a great way to get started on your search for the perfect Maypole developer.
Perfect. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this Maypole mini deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground here today.
We have.
From the basics to hiring and managing those talented developers. Hopefully you found it helpful and you're feeling a little more confident about using Maypole for your own projects.
It's been a pleasure talking with you.
A huge thank you to theperfectdeveloper.com for lending their expertise to this deep dive. And to our listeners, if you want to simplify the hiring process and find the perfect developer, remember to check out theperfectdeveloper.com's 5 questions. It's the fastest way to find the right person for the job. Until next time, happy coding.